They told you marriage was a destination, the reward, the crown jewel of a life well lived. But they never told you what happens when the ceremony ends and the masks stay on. They never warned you that a marriage without growth is not a sanctuary. It's a sentence, a gilded cage where two souls slowly suffocate beneath the weight of their own unspoken truths. Because without growth, marriage becomes a mausoleum, a place where dreams go to die, where authenticity is buried beneath routine, where the sacred dance of two evolving beings devolves into a stagnant performance. Carl Jung once said, "A marriage is more likely to succeed if the woman follows her own star and remains conscious of her wholeness than if she constantly concerns herself with her husband's star and his wholeness." But what happens when neither partner follows their star? When both abandon their inner callings to maintain the illusion of unity, they become inmates in an emotional prison of their own making, locked in by fear, by obligation, by the haunting question, is this all there is? Friedrich Nietzsche observed, it is not a lack of love, but a lack of friendship that makes unhappy marriages. And friendship requires growth. It demands curiosity. It thrives on the ever-unfolding layers of the self. Without it, marriage becomes a contract of convenience, a silent agreement to stop evolving. But you were not meant to stop. You were not meant to shrink to fit someone else's expectations. You were not meant to trade your becoming for belonging. Because true marriage is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of a deeper one. A sacred union where two individuals commit to witnessing each other's evolution, to holding space for transformation, to challenging and inspiring one another to reach higher, dig deeper, and love more fully. Without growth, love becomes control. Intimacy becomes obligation. And the home you build together becomes a prison cell. So ask yourself, are you growing together? Or are you just growing apart in silence? Are you nurturing each other's dreams? Or are you silently resenting the parts of yourself you've had to abandon? Marriage without growth is just emotional prison. But marriage with growth, it's liberation. It's the daily choice to love not just who your partner is, but who they are becoming. And to allow yourself the same grace. Because when two people commit to growing together, they don't just build a life, they build a legacy, a testament to the power of love that evolves, expands, and endures. Not because it has to, but because it chooses to, every single day. Not through duty, not through fear, but through conscious devotion to the unfolding of the soul, both yours and theirs. Because when growth is absent, love becomes mechanical. The touch loses depth. The eyes no longer search. The words become scripts rehearsed for survival. You learn how to coexist, but forget how to connect. And beneath the polished surface of stability, a quiet grief begins to bloom. The grief of a life half-lived, of a love that forgot how to breathe, of a self that slowly disappeared beneath layers of compromise and routine. And then one day, you realize you're not held, you're trapped. Trapped in a ritual that no longer reflects who you are. Trapped in a dynamic where authenticity is punished and silence is rewarded. Trapped in a home that echoes with the absence of wonder. Because you stopped asking questions. You stopped being curious about each other's pain, each other's joy, each other's shadows and light. And in that stopping, the marriage didn't just stall, it began to die. But death, in the Jungian sense, is not the end. It's the invitation, an initiation into transformation. If you have the courage to face it, because real marriage, the kind that becomes an alchemical bond between two evolving souls, doesn't fear the death of old versions. It requires them. It knows that love must shed its skin to remain alive. That desire must be stoked by truth. That intimacy must be fed by growth. That safety must include the freedom to change. Not just permission to grow, but encouragement. Not just space to evolve, but celebration of it. Anything less is imprisonment with a ring. But when both souls rise, when both choose to evolve rather than endure, marriage becomes a temple, a place where healing happens, where shadows are welcomed, where light is shared, where love is not a possession, but a practice of presence, of truth, of growth, every single day. Because when love becomes a practice instead of a possession, it breathes, it adapts, it humbles itself, it bows to truth rather than control. And that's the kind of love Jung spoke of when he said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Marriage without inner awakening is performance. But marriage that begins with the self and expands outward in truth, that is rebirth. Because what makes marriage sacred is not the ceremony, not the vows, not the structure society demands. It's the integrity between two people willing to see one another as they truly are and still say, I will not imprison you in who you were. I will love who you are becoming. End of chapter. That's not a fantasy. That's a fierce and holy discipline. It's the refusal to let comfort breed complacency. It's two people meeting each other again and again, not in yesterday's identity, but in today's truth. When you grow and your partner grows, the space between you becomes alive. It becomes a bridge, not a battlefield. You no longer cling from fear. You connect from freedom. You no longer demand loyalty in exchange for stillness. You inspire loyalty through your aliveness. That kind of union doesn't ask for sacrifice of the soul. It demands the soul. It thrives only where honesty can breathe, where change is not just tolerated but required. Because a marriage that doesn't grow isn't standing still. It's dissolving quietly beneath layers of pretense and passive resignation. And before you know it, you're strangers in the same bed. Ghosts in a home built on yesterday. Actors in a play that no longer fits the story. Your soul is aching to write. But it doesn't have to be that way. Not if you're willing to wake up. Not if you're willing to speak the truth, even if it shakes. Not if you're willing to tear down what's safe to build what's real. Because real love doesn't fear revolution. It requires it. It requires confrontation of the self, of the shadow, of the silent resentments that build brick by brick between two people until they can no longer feel each other through the wall. It requires the death of comfort, the death of ego, the death of the fantasy that love means never being challenged. Because love that never challenges you will never change you. And love that never changes you will bury you in numbness, in routine, in the soft decay of good enough. But your soul wasn't born for good enough. It was born for fullness, for the kind of marriage that becomes a sacred fire, one that doesn't just warm, but refines, that burns away pretense, that purifies the bond through truth, not through roles. And yes, it's uncomfortable to grow beside someone, to see them change, to feel yourself change, and not grip tighter, but to open wider. It takes immense courage to say, I no longer know who you are becoming, but I want to meet them. I want to meet you again. Not once, not yearly, but daily, every conversation, every conflict, every silence that could become a wall or a window. And that is the kind of marriage most never dare to build, because it means risking it all. The image, the stability, the neat little story. But in that risk lies the only path to real intimacy, because love that fears change can never truly see. And what isn't seen isn't loved. Not really. You weren't created to spend your life unseen. And neither was the one you married. So burn the fantasy. Let the illusion die. And ask the only question that matters. Are we still growing? Are we still meeting each other in truth? Or are we just playing roles in a prison that looks like a home? Because the truth is, marriage can be the most liberating spiritual container you'll ever step into. But only if both people are brave enough to evolve together. Together doesn't mean unchanged. Together doesn't mean identical paths or perfectly aligned paces. Together means you witness one another's metamorphosis with reverence instead of resistance. It means you hold space, not possession. You choose presence over performance. You allow the sacred tension between familiarity and mystery to keep the relationship alive not in fear, but in awe. Because no matter how long you've loved someone, you've never fully known them. Not if they're growing. Not if you're growing. And that is not a threat. That is the invitation to fall in love again. Not with the memory of who they were, but with the emergence of who they're becoming. To let go of the comfort of the known and step into the sacred unknown together. When you both choose that, you don't just stay married. You stay in love. And that love, it's not built on endurance. It's built on evolution, on the courageous decision to keep looking each other in the eye and asking, who are you today? What hurts? What excites you now? What part of yourself are you afraid to show me? And then listening, really listening, without defense, without agenda, without needing them to stay who they were for your comfort. That's when the prison begins to dissolve. That's when the bars melt into bridges. That's when the silence turns back into song. Because when love stops growing, it starts grieving. And if you felt that grief, that quiet sorrow of being next to someone yet miles apart, don't ignore it. Don't numb it. Don't shame it. Name it. Because the moment you name it, you reclaim your power. And you open the door not just to healing, but to rebirth of yourself, of them, of the sacred union you were always meant to build. And that sacred union, it does not emerge through pretending. It does not bloom from silence. It is not held together by outdated vows that suffocate rather than sanctify. It comes alive only when truth is allowed to speak, even when the truth is messy, even when it hurts, even when it risks the comfort of the old for the fire of the real. Because that's what love is, not comfort, but clarity. Not security through stagnation, but security through authenticity. And real love, the kind that frees you while binding you, deperit, only flourishes in the presence of growth. Not just external achievements, but soul-deep expansion. A marriage that thrives is one where the question is not, how do we avoid falling apart? But how do we keep becoming, even if it changes everything? That's what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. You don't fuse into one another and call it closeness. You rise into yourselves and call it union. Two whole beings, side by side, not shackled, but witnessed, not imprisoned, but inspired. And that requires courage, because the easy path, the path of endurance, of pretending, of sacrificing truth for appearances, will always be there, but so will the quiet death that comes with it. the death of intimacy, the death of self-respect, the death of aliveness. So you must choose every day, every conversation, every silence that could either become a wall or a doorway. You must choose to grow together or apart, but always upward. Because marriage without growth isn't stillness. It's slow erosion. And you were not meant to erode in love. You were meant to expand. And if your marriage is not a container that holds that expansion, then it is not love. It is fear, dressed in ceremony. But if you both dare to evolve, if you both dare to meet the new versions of each other again and again, then you don't just survive marriage. You transcend in it. And that transcendence, it doesn't look like perfection. It looks like presence. It looks like late night conversations that strip away everything performative. It looks like the raw honesty of saying, I don't know who I'm becoming, but I want you to know them too. It looks like the willingness to sit in the discomfort of growth, to hold space for transformation that may not benefit the ego, but will elevate the soul. It means grieving the version of your relationship that can no longer carry your evolution, and celebrating the birth of something far more real. It's not about going back to how things used to be. It's about creating something new, something true, something earned through the fire of becoming. That's why so many relationships die quietly, not from betrayal, not from infidelity, but from the quiet decision to stop becoming, to freeze in time, to call it love, to endure what was never meant to be permanent. But marriage was never meant to be a museum. It was always meant to be alive. It was never about staying the same. It was always about holding each other through the chaos of change, because love is not found in never changing. It is forged in the choice to change together. And when you rise into your own growth, when you reclaim your inner fire, when you look into your partner's eyes, not with expectation, but with invitation, that's when the prison breaks. That's when the walls fall. That's when the rows dissolve and two souls meet again, not as who they were forced to be, but as who they were always becoming. And that is not just marriage. That is a sacred revolution. A revolution not written in grand gestures, but in the daily defiant act of showing up with truth, with presence, with reverence for the mystery unfolding between two ever-evolving souls. Because to love someone deeply is not to possess them. It is to witness them, to sit in the storm of their transformation without flinching, to choose curiosity over comfort, to ask, who are you today? And mean it, not because the old version wasn't enough, but because we were never meant to be static. You see, the prison isn't made of wall. It's made of roles, of stories we were told about what marriage should look like, who we should become to be worthy of staying loved. But those stories were written in fear, and you were never meant to live someone else's script. You were meant to write your own with a partner who is not a captor, but a co-creator. A partner who doesn't ask you to dim your light, but who shields the flame while you grow it. A partner who doesn't punish your change, but who rises with it. Because anything else isn't love. It's a ceasefire, a negotiation, a beautifully decorated emotional war zone. And eventually, the silence becomes unbearable. The mask becomes heavy. The longing for truth becomes louder than the need to keep the peace. So you either break the cycle or you break yourself. But when you choose growth, real growth, you don't just change the marriage. You change everything. You break the generational echo of silence. You redefine what intimacy really means. You raise the standard for every soul who dares to love after you. And you show the world that marriage, when built on evolution, not endurance, is not a prison. It's ascension not into perfection, but into presence, into the real, raw, sacred territory of becoming, where love is not a reward for compliance, but a reflection of your courage to evolve, where partnership doesn't suppress your transformation. It requires it. And when two people commit to that level of truth, that level of fire, that level of soul integrity, they don't just stay together. They rise together through every death and rebirth, through every uncomfortable mirror, through every honest, trembling conversation that begins with, I'm not the same, and I hope you still want to know me. That's not weakness. That is the most powerful intimacy on earth. Because in that space, you're not performing. You're not pleasing. You're not playing a role. You are present, fully, fiercely, freely, and the relationship becomes a living thing. A sacred space where growth is not feared, but celebrated, where change is not a threat, but an offering, where each version of you that rises is met with reverence, not resistance. And the love that grows in that soil, it is unshakable, because it wasn't built on control. It was built on clarity. It wasn't rooted in fear. It was birthed through freedom. And you look back one day, not at a marriage that survived, but at a union that ascended, not despite the growth, but because of it. Because that is what true sacred union is. Not endurance disguised as love, but expansion born of truth. Not a fortress where both partners hide, but a fire they feed together. A fire that burns away illusion, burns away comfort, burns away the lie that says, love must look one way to be real. No, real love is fluid. It adapts. It asks again and again, who are you becoming, and how can I meet you there? It does not fear the unknown, it invites it. It does not grip tighter as you grow, it makes room. It understands that freedom is not a threat to connection. It is the foundation of it. Because when you are free to evolve, when your soul is not shackled by the illusion of permanence, then what remains is not forced closeness, but chosen presence. And that is the only love worth building your life around. So burn the myth of stability at all costs. Burn the fairy tale that says change is failure. Burn the prison made of politeness, passivity, and pretense. And Standra, awake, alive, in the wild, holy space of becoming, where love is not a role you play, but a soul you meet again and again and again. And if your partner can walk that path with you, if they too are willing to shed who they were, to honor who they're becoming, then you are not married in name only. You are united in purpose, bound not by fear, but by evolution. That is not emotional imprisonment. That is transcendence. That is the divine work of two souls becoming together forever. So if you've been waiting for permission to outgrow what no longer reflects you, to speak what's been silenced, to shed the skin of a marriage that no longer breathes, let this be it. Let this be the moment where endurance gives way to awakening. Let this be the moment where you no longer call suffering sacred, where you stop shrinking for the sake of peace, where you choose truth even when it shakes the ground beneath you. Because you were not born to survive love. You were born to expand inside it, to evolve, to awaken, to rise beside someone who is not threatened by your becoming, but ignited by it. And if they cannot rise with you, then let them watch you fly. Because a marriage without growth is not love. It is slow erosion. It is a contract of fear. But when you choose growth, when you build love on the fire of transformation, you don't just escape the prison, you become the key. And you unlock a love the world rarely sees. A love not built on what's easy, but on what's eternal. You don't understand the opposite sex because you never truly understood yourself. You think you're seeing them clearly, but what you're really seeing is a projection, a hallucination of your own fears, fantasies, and forgotten wounds. A mask you've painted over someone else's face because the truth terrifies you. The feminine and masculine are not puzzles to solve. They are mirrors. And each time you look at her or him, you're not confronting them. You're confronting the war within your own psyche. Carl Jung called it the anima and the animus, the unconscious feminine within the man, the unconscious masculine within the woman. But we simplified it. We reduced it to stereotypes. We put it in memes. We made jokes. And in doing so, we killed the sacred. You don't understand the opposite sex because you were never initiated into the depths of your own being. You were handed a script, told what love should look like, told what strength should feel like, told what men want, what women want, as if we were robots coded by cliches. But beneath those cliches is a primal ache, a longing, a silence too heavy to carry in words. You felt it, that moment when you're next to her, but something is missing, that gap, that invisible wall. You want to reach her, touch her soul, see her fully. But something in the space between you breaks it before it begins. And it's not because of her or him. It's because you were never taught how to see. You were taught how to possess, how to impress, how to seduce or submit or perform, but not how to witness, not how to hold space, not how to be present with the storm inside another human being without needing to control it. And that's why you fail. You fail not because you are unworthy, but because you were never shown what real connection requires, the death of the ego. Every time you try to understand the opposite sex through logic, through tactics, through rigid frames, you fail. Because they are not math. They are myth. The woman in front of you is not just a body. She is a cathedral of ancient memory. She carries the grief of 1,000 silenced mothers, the rage of every violated girl, the brilliance of every wild, divine, feminine spirit that was caged and crucified by a world that fears her depths. And if you look at her with your shallow eyes trained by porn, by gossip, by pickup tactics and locker room talk, you will never see her. You will only see your own reflection, insecure, reactive, blind. And the man in front of you, he's not just a threat or a paycheck or a rescuer. He's the exile, the archetype, the sacred fool who's been trained to wear armor over his wounds, to laugh instead of cry, to conquer instead of feel. And you will not touch his heart by manipulating him, belittling him, controlling him. You will only reach him by remembering him, by seeing the wild, broken God underneath his fear and choosing to meet him there. But to do that, you must first remember yourself. Because the truth is, no man can see the divine in a woman until he has made peace with the divine feminine inside himself. No woman can truly hold a man until she has embraced the sacred masculine within her own chest. You keep looking outside, trying to decode them, but the answers are inside, always have been. Desire is not just physical, it's symbolic. You don't just want her curves, you want what she represents. Mystery, surrender, chaos, the place inside yourself you were never allowed to touch. And so you chase it outside. You don't just want his strength, you want what he holds. Direction, command, stillness. The part of your soul that was never mirrored, never affirmed. And so you seek it in another body, hoping he'll give it to you. But no one can give you what you've abandoned within. And this is the wound. You think love is an escape, but it's an exposure. You think desire is a path to bliss, but it's a mirror to your own unmet self. And so your relationships fail, not because you were wrong for each other, but because you were strangers to yourselves. You tried to dance the sacred dance without ever learning the rhythm of your own heartbeat. You mimicked the steps, bought the roses, sent the texts, made the promises, but your body was hollow. Your gaze was scripted, and she could feel it. He could feel it, because presence cannot be faked. And that's what the opposite sex truly wants, not your perfection, but your presence. Not your resume of traits, but your depth of being. And presence only comes when you've descended into yourself, when you've wrestled with your shadow, when you've wept in the silence, when you've stripped away everything that was never you. Do you know why you can't hold her chaos? Because you've rejected your own. Do you know why you fear his intensity? Because you've abandoned your own inner fire. You are not scared of them, you are scared of what they mirror. She mirrors your lack of embodiment. He mirrors your unclaimed power. And so the masculine demonizes her emotion, calls it irrational, hysterical, manipulative, not because it's wrong, but because it reminds him of the mother who was never present, the ex who used his tenderness as a weapon, the parts of himself he buried just to be strong. And the feminine resents his focus, calls it cold, controlling, emotionally unavailable in aught, because he truly is, but because it triggers her, reactivates the memory of abandonment, the father who never stayed, the world that told her to play small. This isn't about strategy. This is about healing. Until the masculine reclaims its ability to feel and the feminine reclaims its right to be, we will continue to miss each other again and again in bed, in marriage, in fleeting moments of almost connection. It is not your fault that you were not taught this. It is not your fault that the world gave you scripts and sitcoms and dysfunction and called it love. But it is your responsibility to unlearn it, to sit with yourself long enough that your own inner woman can cry and scream and express without judgment, to sit with yourself long enough that your inner man can stand up, hold his spine, protect his kingdom without apology. Because only then can you look across the bed or the table or the battlefield and truly see them. Not as an object, not as a role, but as a soul like yours, fragmented, aching, sacred, whole. And in that moment, understanding won't come through words, it won't come through books, it will come through remembrance. A quiet, cosmic knowing, I recognize you, not for who I want you to be, not for how you make me feel, but for who you are. And from that place, where your inner man and woman hold hands, you will begin to relate differently. You will no longer need to be right. You will no longer need to be wanted. You will no longer need to dominate or submit or seduce. You will simply meet. And when two people meet, truly meet from that place of self-ownership and sacred witness, something ancient comes alive. Love is no longer an escape. It becomes the furnace of transformation. And in that furnace, everything false is burned away. All the games, all the roles, all the smallness you wore like armor because you were terrified of being fully seen, it all turns to ash in the presence of truth. And what's left? Two sovereign beings standing naked in soul saying, I see you, not through the filters of fear or fantasy, not through the need to fix or possess, but through the stillness of witnessing, through the sacred art of holding space without filling it with noise. This is the reunion, not just between man and woman, but between you and the forgotten parts of yourself. Because you can't touch another soul until you've touched your own. You can't hold her tenderness until you've held your own tears. You can't respect his fire until you've stood inside your own. It's all one. The reason you don't understand the opposite sex is because you've been trying to decode a language you never learned how to feel. A language that doesn't speak in words, but in energy, in nervous systems, in breath, in silence. So stop asking what they want. Stop asking how to win them, how to unlock them, how to master the game. There is no game. There is only presence and absence. There is only truth and performance. There is only the sacred arm, the story you've built to run from it. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to understand yourself so deeply that your very presence becomes a tuning fork, so powerful, so honest, so grounded, that when they stand near you, they remember who they are. That is what the opposite sex truly craves, not your validation, but your wholeness. And to get there, you must walk through the fire of everything that kept you fractured. You must take the projections off their face and bring them back into your body. Every fear, every fantasy, every false belief about what love is supposed to be, it's time to dismantle it. And when you do, something breathtaking happens. The war stops. The resentment softens. The confusion clears. Because now you're no longer trying to change them. You're choosing to see them. Not as a mystery to solve, but as a reflection to honor. And when two people come together with nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to possess, only something to share, that's when love stops being a transaction and becomes a transformation. That's when sex becomes a sacrament. That's when conflict becomes a mirror. That's when presence becomes a revolution. So, if you truly want to understand the opposite sex, begin with your own wholeness. Begin with your breath. Begin with the quiet voice that's been whispering beneath all the noise. There's nothing to fix, only everything to remember. Burn the story and see them not as opposite, but as the piece of you you've been running from all along. Because that's the final truth, isn't it? There is no opposite sex. Only the exiled parts of ourselves wrapped in another skin. You don't struggle to understand them because they're different. You struggle because they awaken the very parts of you that were never given permission to breathe. The tenderness you buried, the fire you denied, the longing you locked away. They are not your enemy. They are your mirror. And that mirror is ruthless. It will show you everything, your neediness, your pride, your addictions, your abandonment wounds, your false power, your fear of being vulnerable. And when it does, you will want to run, but don't. Because if you look into that mirror long enough, without flinching, you will meet the part of you that has waited a lifetime to be remembered. The divine, the sacred masculine, standing unshaken in chaos, not to control it, but to witness it. The sacred feminine, pulsing with creative storm, not to please, but to awaken. They were never supposed to fight. They were supposed to dance, to spiral around each other, not in competition, but in creation. And when you remember that, when you stop trying to win love and instead become the space where love remembers itself, then everything changes. You stop chasing. You stop fixing. You stop controlling. You start witnessing. You start choosing. You start embodying. And the more you embody, the more you magnetize with charm, but with truth. Because truth is what the soul recognizes. And when you become that truth raw, grounded, integrated, the world around you begins to shift. People respond to you differently. Not because you've manipulated them, but because you've stopped manipulating yourself. You've stopped negotiating with your instincts. You've stopped apologizing for your depth. You've stopped demanding that others complete what only your own integration can fulfill. That's when love begins. Not the counterfeit kind built on need, fear, or performance, but the kind that holds weight, the kind that transcends time, the kind that doesn't need to scream to be felt. You want to understand the opposite sex? Understand yourself so deeply that when you look at them, you no longer see other. You see home, not because they complete you, but because they remind you of what you've reclaimed. And when you can hold their wideness without trying to tame it, when you can sit with their silence without needing to fill it, when you can honor their pain without trying to fix it, you will realize you were never trying to understand them. You were trying to remember you. So stop seeking answers. Become the answer. And in your becoming, may you finally see them, not through the lens of logic, but through the fire of your own awakened soul. Because once your soul is awake, truly awake, you no longer see man and woman as adversaries or enigmas. You see them as artifacts of divinity. Not concepts to categorize, but forces to honor. You see the masculine not just as provider or protector, but as sacred structure, the still riverbank through which the feminine flows. And you see the feminine not just as beauty or chaos, but as sacred motion, the river that carves mountains and births worlds. And when those forces meet not from lack, but from fullness, they no longer need to explain themselves. They recognize each other. The man who has faced his shadow doesn't fear her depth, he bows to it. The woman who has claimed her fire doesn't resent his direction, she amplifies it. And together they become not two halves seeking completion, but two flames awakening creation. This is the alchemy of understanding, not by learning more, but by being more present, more honest, more whole. You do not need to decode every nuance of the opposite sex. You need to clean your lens, because when your inner masculine is exiled, you will project that abandonment onto men. When your inner feminine is repressed, you will project that repression onto women. But when you reunite those forces inside you, when you reconcile the discipline with the softness, the protector with the surrender, the reason with the intuition, you become the bridge. And from that bridge, you do not relate out of fear. You relate from power, from grace, from clarity, and the world will feel it. You will enter the room and no longer need validation. You will love without losing yourself. You will lead without force and follow without fear. Because now you understand that love is not possession. It is presence. It is not sacrifice. It is sovereignty. It is not about roles. It is about remembrance. So now finally let the war end. Stop trying to figure them out. Start becoming the version of yourself who no longer needs to. Because once you've met yourself at the depth you demand from others, you will stop demanding. You will start attracting. And those who come close will not just see a man or a woman, they will see home. They will feel the echo of every truth they've ever run from, and they will stay. Not because you completed them, but because your wholeness invited their own. That is what it means to understand the opposite sex. Not by reaching for them, but by returning to you. And in that return slow, sacred, irreversible, you will not only understand the opposite sex, you will understand the entirety of relationship. Because what is relationship truly? Not a transaction, not a contract, not a means to validation, security, or escape. It is the mirror through which the soul tests its own reflection. It is the crucible where your growth is either accelerated or avoided. It is the divine tension between longing and liberation. And when you step into relationship from that place not of emptiness, but of embodiment, everything shifts. You no longer seek to be loved, you seek to become love. You no longer chase attention, you command presence through your own alignment. You no longer ask, will they choose me? Because you've already chosen yourself. And that energy is magnetic. Not because it seduces, but because it reminds. It reminds the other of who they are beneath the masks. It stirs the sleeping parts of their spirit. It resurrects what routine tried to kill. But none of this can happen if you keep bypassing yourself. You must go deeper into the egg, into the confusion, into the messy, beautiful paradox of being human. You must cry where you once clenched, feel where you once fled, speak where you once swallowed. Only then will you understand. It was never about decoding the other. It was about coming home to the wild symmetry within. The masculine and feminine are not roles you perform, they are currents you carry. Each of us holds both. And the more you reclaim what's been repressed, the more you dissolve the illusion of separation. Suddenly, the woman before you is not irrational. She is your own inner chaos, daring you to stop controlling and start listening. Suddenly, the man before you is not emotionally unavailable. He is your own unmet authority, inviting you to find structure within. This is not philosophy. This is alchemy. And it doesn't happen through study. It happens through surrender. It happens when you finally stop asking why they don't get you and start asking what part of yourself have you abandoned in order to be loved. Because in the end, the only real separation between you and the opposite sex is the distance between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. Close that distance, and you will no longer need to understand. You will simply know. You will know in the way your body breathes around them. You will know in the silence that feels safe instead of tense. You will know in the sacred space between your eyes where truth is spoken without sound. This is the end of war, the end of blame, the end of hiding. This is the return to yourself, to the divine polarity inside your bones, to the sacred connection that was never lost and forgotten. So stop performing, stop fixing, stop chasing the other half of your soul in someone else's body, and begin the real work of becoming whole. So now you know, it was never really about them. It was always about you. You and the parts of yourself you abandoned to be accepted. You and the sacred forces within you that you feared to feel. You don't understand the opposite sex because you were never taught to understand the sacred duality inside your own soul. But now you remember. Now you stand at the threshold not of another person, but of yourself. And this time, you won't knock with fear. You'll walk in with fire. You'll burn the scripts, burn the shame, burn the story that told you love was something you earn by betraying who you are. No, love is what erupts when you stop lying to yourself. When you stand unmasked in front of another and say, this is me, fully, fiercely, finally. And when they look back not with confusion, but with recognition, you'll understand the thing you've been chasing all your life was never in them. It was in the permission to be you. Whole, integrated, wild, awake. And when two souls meet from that place in all broken halves, but sovereign flames, there is no longer confusion. There is only clarity. So stop asking how to understand them. Start asking how to remember you. Because the moment you return to the fullness of your truth, you will stop fearing the opposite and start dancing with the divine.